Hi everyone, Dr. Tom Forfa here from Australia. I'm excited to be on the Finding Genius podcast talking about osteoporosis and the natural ways to reverse it, strengthen your bones, and go back to doing the activities you love and remove that doubt and fear that comes with this terrible diagnosis. I'll talk about my journey of being diagnosed and how I've been able to reverse it naturally, as well as my background as a physician and how that's all tied in. And we'll talk about my bone building protocol, as well as what people can be doing to prevent it and support their family members or themselves, depending on whether it's you or someone else going through it. But looking forward to be on the interview and talking to you about this topic, and hopefully you'll join us.
You're listening to the Good Question Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Our goal is to make each of our guests exclaim, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. Because when that happens, it means you, the listener, may be inspired to learn more beyond the interview and to ask great questions yourself that lead to new insights. In this podcast, we cover historical and current anthropology, comparative religion, and history. Welcome, and let's get started.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Good Question Podcast. My guest today is Dr. Tomasz Forfa, or Tom Forfa. He's a physician, educator, and naturopath that works in he's working on osteoporosis, trying to reverse it without medication, and who knows what else that modern science wants to do to poor people that have various conditions, meaning surgeries, things like that. So, welcome, Thomas. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me, Rich. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, tell me a bit about your background and why have you decided to study osteoporosis?
Yeah, so as you mentioned in the intro, I have a background in medicine. I was a physician a number of years ago, and it came to a point where I became disillusioned and burnt out with the profession and threw in the towel and left to travel and run businesses and get involved in philanthropy. And that was 10 years ago. And then fast forward to 2020, in the middle of COVID lockdowns, I went for a bike ride and my front wheel fell into a little ditch, and I slowly kind of came over the front and I landed on my wrists. Nothing too dramatic, but I broke my right wrist. And on its own, it doesn't seem too bad. It's kind of understandable. But then when you put that into the context of the fact that I'd broken, that was my third fracture in 18 months. Before that, I'd rolled my ankle and broke it. I was also doing a boxing class, and I had a pad against my chest and I punched the pad and broke my rib. And then that's off the background of multiple other wrist and ankle and rib fractures.
So just, because you're 300 years old, right?
No, that's right. That's to be expected as a 300-year-old man. That's it. But I went to my family doctor, and he thought it was suspicious as well. And we did a scan of my bones, and turns out that essentially I was an otherwise healthy 37-year-old male, but I had the bones of a postmenopausal 65-year-old lady. So my bones were fragile, were depleted, and they were very likely to break. And that was a bit of a surprise to me personally, because I've always been relatively healthy. But it sent me on a bit of a deep dive, because I wanted to understand what was going on, why did this happen to me, and especially when they found 2 crush fractures in my lower back as well. That scared me. I started worrying whether I would break another bone, whether I'd break my back, whether I'd be incapacitated. And this is something that happens to a lot of men and women who do get diagnosed with osteoporosis. And it becomes a very frightening experience, wondering when's the next bone going to break. And so I saw a number of doctors, and they all kind of recommended the standard. Well, at first they really scratched their heads because they'd never seen a male that young with osteoporosis. It's generally something that's, generally speaking, it's a condition that women experience after menopause, where the estrogen's removed from the body, and estrogen protects the bones. And so when the estrogen's gone, the bones tend to break down and become very weak and fragile. And we have what's called, with the label is osteoporosis, but the problem is that the bones are very likely to fracture.
Well, why did you get it? I mean, were you doing workouts, or had you not, or what was the reason?
Well, that was the interesting thing. My doctor found nothing, no particular cause whatsoever, and they call that idiopathic. Where one of my
also doctors idiopaths. So I had.
Yeah, I was about to say one of my Professors used to call it the idiots don't know the pathology. But I narrowed it down to a number of different reasons. For example, myself, I had a long-running gluten intolerance, so I was inflamed and not absorbing the nutrients that I needed for bone strength. I also spent my 20s and 30s avoiding all kinds of dairy, which is our greatest source of calcium in the West. I also had relatively low testosterone levels, which has been shown to contribute to it. So when you kind of start to put all those things together, and also I'm a thin, tall guy, and that in itself is a risk factor of being on the thinner side. And so put all that together, it's a perfect recipe for weaker and fragile bones. Just going back to kind of my story there, my endocrinologist recommended I take, essentially he didn't know what to do, and he said, well, Tom, you may as well take the medications. Now, I'm not completely against medications, but in my books, they're kind of like a last resort. I want to be able to find out what's going on and treat the cause and fix it. And that's kind of how I approached it. I said to my doctor, give me 6 months, let me figure this thing out on my own, because some of these medications have some pretty potentially drastic side effects, and you're pretty much on them for life, because as soon as you stop, your bones go back to normal and get worse as well. So I thought, let me figure this out first. And so I did a deep dive, and I got to understand how bones work, why they weaken, why they strengthen, what we can do as people to actually prevent osteoporosis, but also most likely it's being able to reverse it or prevent it from getting worse. And I started to implement those actions. And 6 months later, I saw my endocrinologist. I slid the results over to him with a big smile on my face because I had improved my bones after he said that all we can expect is that they don't get any worse. That's the best we can hope for. And I kind of proved him wrong and showed him better results. And to my frustration, all he could say is, I'll throw you a party, Tom, when your bones are back to normal. And I can happily say that they're almost back to normal now. So I'm looking forward to that party.
How long did it take you to improve them, and what did you do?
So the first 6 months, it was a big improvement. And then it's been a bit slower over the remaining 3.5 years. It's been a 4-year journey so far, because I did have to kind of figure things out, make a few mistakes along the way. And it's been an up and down kind of a journey in terms of my bone strength. But what I did was I've kind of broken it down into 3 main components, kind of like a triangle, if you will, of the requirements to naturally strengthen your bones. The first side is to remove any obstacle to strengthening your bones. And so these are any medical conditions that may be contributing to it, particularly for men. And I speak to a lot of men about this because they tend to be underdiagnosed and undertreated, and it resonates with my own story as well. And so we need to understand what are the potential causes, what kind of medications or conditions could be contributing or preventing the bones from strengthening. And we also need to address any hormone imbalances, which is a big contributing factor. Once that's kind of addressed, we can start to trigger the bone growth. Now, here's the thing about bones. They're kind of like muscles. Unless we work them out, they're not going to get any stronger. They don't just spontaneously get stronger once we're adults. When we're kids, we're jumping around and the body's just naturally strengthening and growing bone. But when we hit about 25, it just kind of, from there on out, it just starts to, if we don't look after the bones, they will just slowly over time start to wither away. But if we start...
Is there any preferential wearing? Like, when people have weak bones, which are the ones that kind of like, quote unquote, go first or become preferentially weakest first, if that happens?
Well, it's hard to tell, but the ones that we usually focus on is the neck of the femur, so up in the hip, the lower back, and the forearms, because they tend to be the ones that break and cause the most issues in people with bones. For example, when we fall over, it's usually outstretched hand, and we fall and we break the forearm. If we fall out of a bed or fall from a standing height and break a hip, that has the worst potential consequence. The hip is the big one, where 1 in 5 men who break a hip, or in fact, men and women, up to 1 in 5 will pass away in the first 12 months after breaking a hip.
Why is that?
Well, it's often an exacerbation of pre-existing illnesses and other comorbidities. And also people don't get back to normal functioning after that. Now, because we're going to think about this, is generally speaking here, it's in the older population. So people over 50, and then more so that people over 65. 75% of hip fractures worldwide happen in men and women over 65. So when they do fracture, a year later, the statistics show that 40% can't walk as well as they used to, or they can't walk at all, and then up to 60% need support, and it's 12 months later. So it's a slow recovery process for the majority of people, and it exacerbates pre-existing conditions, which, in the first 12 months, up to 1 in 5 may pass away, and the increased risk factors may continue for up to 10 years after that. And this is a condition that's going to become more known to us in the next 10 years because of the aging population. And it's going to be a big topic of discussion, and the effects that it has on people's suffering afterward, and the chances of them passing away. Yeah, so I want to be human to get it out there.
Yeah, psychologically, what happens to someone that, breaks a bone and they're older? I mean, do they get very scared? Like, uh-oh, I'm literally falling apart. I was depending on these bones, but shit, I'm in real trouble. Like how do people react emotionally to these injuries?
Yeah, you're very right on the mark there, Richard. Like it's very scary. It causes doubt in your own body, and people they lose their independence, and that in old age is a big factor that contributes to deterioration in their mental kind of health and their excitement for the future. If they can't get out of bed, if they can't look after themselves, up to 10% end up within long-term care afterwards. And there is a lot of fear around it. And even at a younger age, people end up not doing what they used to, which in itself adds to the risk factors of further fractures, because if they're not being as active, then their muscles deteriorate, their coordination goes, their ability to catch themselves if they start to stumble deteriorates. So the chances of someone having another fracture increases by something like 86% after they've already had their first, because of things like what you're talking about there, the lack of confidence, the lack of getting out there and maintaining an active life, because they can't, or they're afraid to. And they need support to be able to do that. So it could be scary, but it can also be prevented and treated. That's the uplifting thing here, where understanding that a majority of women have this, and that's something that a lot of physicians and family doctors and naturopaths, they all often think about that. But then there's the male population that's oftentimes, we're not with, it's usually seen as a women's condition, so we don't kind of get, people just don't think about it, and then the fellas, they tend to have worse outcomes as a result. But so just going back to those three things that I did, the triangle. So we've talked about removing the medical causes to potential obstacles to the strengthening bone. Then there's the triggering of the bone. And now this can be done before or after a fracture. So some incredible research and programs are available now to help people get back to being able to move, but also to strengthen their bones. And the key here is the right kind of movement and exercise. And it's nothing dramatic. It's things like lifting some weights, supervised usually, doing heel drops, standing on one foot, something, dancing. There are some really exciting things that people can do depending on their age and their limitations. But the studies and the evidence is just very exciting as to what can be done without the medication.
Well, what are the medications supposed to do, and what are their side effects? Like if someone's, being pressured to take them by the doctor, whoever, what are the downsides?
So the downside, firstly, is you're on it for life, essentially. There are two types of, generally speaking, types of medications. The first prevents the further breakdown of bone, and the second type helps create more bone. And the first one's called first-line treatment. So when you go to, they usually recommend those. That could be a tablet that you take daily, or it could be an injection that you have once every 6 months or so, and or maybe 12 months. It just depends on ones. And the side effects of those, depending if you're having the tablet, it could be reflux, it could be all kinds of pains and aches and bone pain, which is kind of sounds counterintuitive, that you're trying to prevent bone issues, but you're getting more bone issues. It could be breakdown of the jawbone. That's a rare one, but scary one. And in terms of the injections, there could be nausea, different kinds of neurological and bony pain, problem with eating, problems with the injection site, allergic reactions, and also that deterioration of the jawbone, which is scary.
Well, and people are encouraged to do any besides medication. Are they told to work out? Are they told to do anything natural, or is it real medication?
It really depends on who you speak to and who your physician is. Oftentimes, it's straight to the medication. The way the conversation goes is, hey, you've had this scan, you've got osteoporosis. They write out a script, take this, and that's the extent of the conversation. If you have a great physician or a family doctor, they'll sit down and explain it. They'll give you the options. They'll encourage you to become active. Changing diet is another one as well. But look, I'm not against the medication. They are required, and people who can't or are unwilling to engage in those types of activities that I spoke about, because preventing the fractures is very important. As I said, 1 in 5 can pass away from further fractures, and they do affect independence and mobility and health. And so it's very important to do something about it. And if people, personally speaking, the gentlemen that I speak to, they're very willing and ladies too, willing and able and keen to get active. And that could be a lot of fun, and it just improves the quality of their life, generally speaking. But if they can't, if they're already in a nursing home or a facility, or they're not willing to get involved, then the medications, oftentimes, as bad as the side effects might sound, the potential downsides of not taking them are far greater, depending on the individual, than actually. So I don't want to scare anybody off them. It's just a matter of, me personally, I feel like they're a last, depending on the
Right. What protocol have you developed that's different? What do you recommend?
Yeah, so that comes back down to that, what I call the stop bone loss protocol, that 3-sided triangle. So we've got the removing the obstacles, triggering the bone growth, and the third one is giving the bones the building blocks they need. And this can be things like the right types, getting enough protein in our diet, and the right kinds of fats, but also vitamins like calcium, vitamin D, K2, magnesium. So things that people are probably already taking some of these, but just optimizing them and making sure that they're the right ones to really hit the bones, and give them the building blocks they need. And if we have those three aspects in place, there really is no reason why the bones shouldn't get stronger. If they're not, we're probably not doing one or more of those, the sides of that triangle.
Well, how long, I know everyone's different, but how long does it take on average for people to really start, seeing some recovery?
Oh, look, Richard, if people can get onto that triangle, it can be very, very quick. It can be very, very quick. The bones, generally speaking, they are a slow-moving tissue. They're not like muscle, which kind of can grow quite quickly. Bones, we're looking at 6-month increment, right, or 12-month. So for me, for example, with 6 months, I saw a dramatic. And if people can get onto that protocol within 6 months, and they get all the things in place out. Again, yes, depending on who they are, it's going to take different. But minimum 6 months, you can start seeing some changes. 12 months, most definitely. And then from there, the world is your oyster, as they say.
Well, in 6 months, like, what changes did you notice? How did you know that, besides getting scanned, let's say, how did you know that your bones were getting better?
Well, that's a good question there, Richard. Without getting scanned or taking a blood test, it's hard to tell. And that's the problem with osteoporosis. They call it a silent disease. Personally, I don't think it's a disease, but that's besides the point. Because we don't know it's happening. We can't see it. But there might be, the statistics say that 10 million Americans have osteoporosis and 35 million are on the verge of getting it. And so we don't know until we break a bone or we get a scan. And so it's up to ourselves to see the risk factors, or up to our doctor to kind of be onto it and then proactively do a scan, or another way to test that, to see that if there are any differences, is to test what are called bone turnover markers, which are essentially signals that are released into the blood that show you whether the bone is being broken down or whether it's being built. And so we can test for those blood markers to see which way they're going. Are they changing in the way that we want, or are they not? And then adapting and adjusting the protocol.
Okay. For yourself, again, did you couldn't feel anything? You had to get, all these diagnostics done in order to, again, to feel anything, right?
Yeah, that's right. Look, if you're implementing all these changes, you're going to feel great, generally speaking. You're getting into better shape, your mobility is improving, your energy is going to increase, you're going to feel a lot better, generally speaking, but you don't know if your bones are actually improved. And that's the frustration with osteoporosis as well. That adds to that concern and the doubt that you were speaking about earlier, Richard, is that we don't know, and it's that great uncertainty that is so frustrating. And that's why with our gentlemen, we want to first build out that's why we call it the stop bone loss protocol, because if we can show that you can stop your bone loss, it gives you that confidence and reassurance that I'm on the right path. Sometimes it can feel like a big task to go back to normal bones. It can feel a bit overwhelming and a bit hard to do. So we break it down into manageable steps. And the first one is to start to get that confidence back and that reassurance, and that you're not going to just break spontaneously or just, coughing or sneezing. It can get that bad as well. So, yeah.
Can you I guess you could break a bone if just with a hard sneeze, right?
Yeah, it can get that bad. And traditionally speaking, the classic osteoporotic fractures are, you shake a hand and you break a bone in your hand, or you sneeze, break a rib, or you fall over from just standing. Some people will twist and bend over in the wrong way and break or fracture a vertebrae. Now, these are very much on the extremes, and this will happen in mostly the older populations. But then there's, people breaking bones, things that are active pursuits, but not so much that you'd expect them to break. And so there's a whole spectrum there. But yeah, it can get that bad.
Okay. So you talked about the 3 categories and what to do, but any particulars in there? Are there like certain foods that, are dietary changes that are really important? Reducing inflammation sounds like a big part, but are there any specific foods that people should have, or is it?
With that, yeah. So the big one to give people something that they can very quickly implement is protein intake. The recommended amounts are far too low. And the populations that often get osteoporosis, that if you look at their track record, they're not getting enough protein. We want to probably double the amount of protein that people are taking or eating. And this can be done very quickly with things like protein whey supplements, like a smoothie with a whey protein powder. And it's delicious too and easy to have. And having a bit of protein with every meal. Now, in terms of, other kind of micronutrients, so calcium, you can have that through your diet, but then it's quite a lot of dairy you need to consume to be able to have that. So it's 2 glasses of milk, a yogurt, and 2 slices of cheese every single day is the recommended amount, which is quite a lot. Or you can take some supplementation, 1,000 milligrams per day for the right amount of calcium. Vitamin D is an important one. You can take that through supplementation or through sunshine. Getting out, 15 minutes a day into the sunlight, which again, that could be hard depending on where you are in the world and what season it is. And when we think of people who are generally on the older side, they're probably not getting out as much, which is an important thing. So those are the main dietary changes. There are many others as well, but not to overwhelm the listeners, those are the things that you could probably start doing quickly and will have the biggest.
Okay. Yeah, for some reason I kept thinking of a pirate saying, I could feel it in me bones, but I guess besides calling it the Pirates Protocol, I don't know where to go with that.
Pirates Protocol, yeah. I have I call it, in terms of the supplementation, I call Spartan approach versus the kitchen sink, where I try to keep it simple, because you can get caught in the weeds and getting very obscure and specific, and it can get overwhelming as to what to take and not to take. And honestly, for me, I like to keep it simple so that I can do it every single day. And that's kind of the opinion that this is for the rest of our lives. There is no cure, in inverted commas, for osteoporosis. It's more that we have to just keep taking the action to prevent the bones from keeping them strong. Okay, so if we can't do it consistently, there's no point. And some people get really caught up in the details and the minutiae, and that gets overwhelming. And so I like to just keep it simple so that people can do it every day. And for myself as well. There's a lot going on in my life, and I'm sure everybody else's lives as well. You don't want to be thinking about the obscurities of boron and all these different kind of elements that may or may not contribute to your bone health. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, Thomas, what's the best way for people to find out more and to find this protocol and work to help themselves?
Yeah, so if you go to our website, bonedensityeducation.com, we have a lot of resources there, and that's where you can get a protocol as well. Yeah, that's probably the best way, bonedensityeducation.com.
Bonedensityeducation.com. Got it. Okay, that's it. All right, well, very good. Well, Tom, thanks so much for coming on this podcast. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me, Richard. It's been great chatting about this.
Thank you for listening to the Good Question Podcast. Please email support@thegoodquestionpodcast.com if you have any referrals to great guests for us to interview. Visit thegoodquestionpodcast.com to hear more interviews. And please help us spread the word by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to this podcast.
Depending on where you are in the world and what season it is. And when we think of people who are generally on the older side, they're probably not getting out as much, which is an important thing. So those are the main dietary changes. There are many others as well, but not to overwhelm the listeners, those are the things that you could probably start doing quickly and will have the biggest.
Okay. Yeah, for some reason I kept thinking of a pirate saying I could feel it in me bones. But I guess besides calling it the Pirates Protocol, I don't know where to go with that.
Pirates Protocol. Yeah, I have I call it, in terms of the supplementation, I call Spartan approach versus the kitchen sink, where I try to keep it simple because you can get caught in the weeds and getting very obscure and specific, and it can get overwhelming as to what to take and not to take. And honestly, for me, I like to keep it simple so that I can do it every single day. And that's kind of the thing, that this is for the rest of our lives. There is no cure, in inverted commas, for osteoporosis. It's more that we have to just keep taking the action to prevent the bones from getting weak, keep keeping them strong. Okay, so if we can't do it consistently, there's no point. And some people get really caught up in the details and the minutiae, and that gets overwhelming. And so I like to just keep it simple so people can do it every day. And for myself as well, there's a lot going on in my life, and I'm sure everybody else's lives as well. You don't want to be thinking about the obscurities of boron and all these different kind of elements that may or may not contribute to your bone health. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, Thomas, what's the best way for people to find out more and to find this protocol and work to help themselves?
Yeah, so if you go to our website, bonedensityeducation.com, we have a lot of resources there, and that's where you can get a protocol as well. Yeah, that's probably the best way, bonedensityeducation.com.
bonedensityeducation.com. Got it. Okay,
That's it.
All right, well, very good. Well, Tom, thanks so much for coming on this podcast. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me, Richard. It's been great chatting about this.
Thank you for listening to the Good Question Podcast. Please email support@thegoodquestionpodcast.com if you have any referrals to great guests for us to interview. Visit thegoodquestionpodcast.com to hear more interviews. And please help us spread the word by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to this podcast. To hear more interviews. And please help us spread the word by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to this podcast.